33.5. Your initial thoughts, Matt?
I'm sitting right where I need to be. I'm close, and I'm not nervous at all or anything. I'm very confident.
Okay.
Dan, he can do those close-ups as many times as he wants, but the beard's got to go. But other than that, I'm perfectly fine.
Listen, you need to be very worried about this. There is no chance that Terrell Owens. There's no chance that Terrell Owens will come anywhere near Randy Moss over the last 2 games of the season.
There's one thing I have to say, though. All kidding aside, though, but this Terrell Owens, he's just got to keep his mouth shut, man. He's killing it, man. That throws a little wrench.
That is hurting you. It's certainly hurting. It's definitely a distraction. Romo may not admit it, and T.O. May say it's nothing, but there's something there, obviously, and it's definitely a distraction to T.O. and to the Cowboys.
He does it everywhere he goes, man. The guy's like a freaking cancer on every team he goes to. It's ridiculous.
He's a great talent, and we're going to talk more about the talent of T.O. in a little while. Yeah. But he's a great talent. But it's true. Wherever he goes, he seems to wear out his welcome. And this season, he's just not the fantasy star that he's been in the past. And that's just the bottom line. And it's not even because Stone Cold said so.
The Cowboys, what do they got, Baltimore?
What are you...
What's that?
Never mind.
What did the Cowboys have next?
Baltimore and then Philadelphia.
Philly? All right. I feel like with his former team, I think they're gonna try to step it up on his side.
But I am legitimately that much concerned about it, but there is definitely the possibility that he will go out extra hard against Philadelphia.
Who did the Patriots play last time?
Who do they have left?
Yeah, no, just the last game.
They played the Oakland Raiders.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
No, but it's close. It's right where
Yeah, it is close for now.
We're basically even. Anything's possible. That's why it makes it a good bet.
Absolutely.
It is close, but let me just say this. Hold the phone, Dan, for a second, because you can't just say there's no chance.
Yes, I can.
No, you can't say that. You can't say that because there is a chance. I know you just did. I know you could say it literally, but my point is that especially the way that fantasy football has gone this year, anything can happen. And you never know. T.O. might rip off 3 touchdowns this week against the Baltimore Ravens, for all you know.
And I might get that callback from the St. Louis Rams.
You might. You might. And maybe you will bang Jessica Simpson.
Maybe.
Yeah. And,
what do you think about that?
Dan, you got to pull the trigger on that, man. It's Jessica Simpson, man.
No, I couldn't. I'm telling you.
You got to set the mozzarellas on her like crazy.
I'm telling you. I know, but, I'm going to be completely honest.
Put the talking aside, Dan. You're not talking.
I can't. I have to be able to connect with a girl like that, and with Jessica Simpson, it just wouldn't be possible.
This is not a Danielle Steele novel, pal. This is a...
Unfortunately, my life reads like a couple chapters of a Danielle Steele novel.
Oh, God.
I hate to admit it, but it's true.
Unbelievable.
All right, well, a little fantasy here for you.
Go ahead.
The score right now, if I win this, I go to the championship game. It's 121 to 104 right now. I got Jackson going.
You have 121 or 104?
With the 104, I'm down. Sorry about that.
And you're in the semifinals of your league, right?
Yes.
You're the number 1 seed.
I already got 2 in the pocket.
Okay.
And I need Jackson to put up 19 to tie, 20 to win.
Well, he was on my team too, and if you just saw that replay, I kind of have a feeling that you're going to come up short just like that. I had him on my team the whole year. He was
be a little nicer, man? I'm losing money out of money here, man.
Now, hold on a second.
I lost a lot of money, too.
He could conceivably score right now.
He could. Is he going to? I don't know. I mean, I drafted him. I mean, I had him from the beginning of the season.
Hold on. Now, hold the phone here.
I just... I mean, this is Donovan McNabb. We've already talked on the show about our thoughts about Donovan McNabb. And,
I totally agree with your thoughts.
Your only hope lies in Deshaun Jackson returning a punt for a touchdown.
Yes.
I think that's where, if he can do that, he might catch a touchdown pass from Donovan, but he's going to need that extra juice, and it's going to come
right now, he's not returning any punts right now.
Yeah.
Or he's not doing it right now.
Mm-hmm. Well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, who else did you have in this week? Did you make a lot of changes?
You know, with me with Bradshaw, I just I don't know what it is.
You started him?
Yeah, I made. Well, you know, my running backs. I don't have. I said last week, Bush killed me.
Right.
Bush actually got 7 points in my league.
Didn't Clowney say don't start Bush last week? I believe he did.
I think he did.
No, I think he said start him.
I think he said don't start him because he was still concerned about him coming off of the injury.
But I have to take that risk because I got nothing. You know, I really had no one else.
Right.
Yeah, but I had. I was always starting. I was starting Benson, right, Cedric Benson, like all through the season. And I bench him and play Bradshaw, and Benson puts up 23 points in my league. If I played him, I would have won.
Right.
Well, Benson's a tough start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Matt. We're going to continue to follow this bet, and we wish you good luck tonight. And right now, you're down by 2 points. Moss 35.5, To 33.5, and we'll check in with you next week. What do you say?
All right, guys, take it easy, and Dan, please no more close-ups, man. We don't need that.
Well, listen.
Have a good night, fellas. Later.
Take it easy, man.
All right, Matt from Long Island, as always, a valued customer.
Absolutely,
here on
absolutely.
Press Pass Radio.
We're very
Press
happy
Pass
to have such a loyal listener like Matt. And you know what? It's always good fun when we get our viewers involved.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to win two tickets to a New York Jets home playoff game is pretty sweet, and that's what we try to bring to all our listeners here, or viewers. Nobody's
Absolutely.
Just a listener.
Absolutely. Well, we want to thank Matt, and we want to make sure everybody knows we're going to keep everybody on track with that in the next couple of weeks. But,
yes, we will.
But stay tuned to Press Pass Radio for that. Let's talk a little bit about. Let's first get into sit or start. It really worked well, I thought, last week. And what this is a segment where Dan and I will list off a couple of scenarios, and Dan will tell me, do you sit them or you start them? And it's important to recognize that we're at the end of the season. You know, a lot of teams and leagues are in their semifinals or championship weeks. So, it's really you're at the nitty gritty. If you're listening, you're either out of your league or you're on the cusp of making the championship, or maybe you've already played your championship, whatever it might be. So this is kind of your last couple of weeks. We'll do a little scenario sit or start, and then we'll kind of go from there. And feel free to chime in 347-482-2000. We're at the Hill, 3rd Avenue between 29th and 30th Street in New York City, and Jack Cognetta along with Daniel Cohen. And Dan, why don't we start the sit or start segment with a guy who really just came out of nowhere. In Yahoo leagues before this week, he was owned by just 4% of fantasy owners. And he got the start, or I don't know if he got the start, but he played tremendously for the Vikings. And I know Jesse Meehan is listening out there in Minnesota, one of our colleagues. And Tavares Jackson, 4 touchdowns against Arizona, a huge game. And my question to you is, sit or start?
He came up huge.
He did come up huge, yeah.
He came up huge, and, I honestly, Atlanta, I'm just looking at it now.
Yeah, sit or start Tavares Jackson against the Falcons.
Atlanta's giving up 343 total yards per game and 223 via the air, which is actually more than they pass for each game. So, depending on, if you somehow made it into the finals with, some quarterback who's, less than stellar,
right,
and has a bad matchup, it's not that unreasonable to think about going into your finals with Tavares Jackson.
Right.
So I might start him, depending on your matchup.
Yeah, look, the Vikings are a playoff contender. And I think that they are, a team that is going to fight for that NFC North Division title. And I think that, why not? 4 touchdowns. The guy, they benched him early in the season. For obvious reasons, he was struggling. But the bottom line is, I think that you got to give Tavares Jackson a chance. If you're in a league where you're in the champ, if he was only owned in 4% of leagues, maybe he's still available. Chances are he's probably not. But the bottom line is that you have to. I think you have to give him a shot. I would say start him.
Yeah, I think that if you have a quarterback matchup, and this is it, the finals is all about matchups, right?
Right.
Forget about the guy's history.
That's right.
If you have a guy like T.O., sorry, Matt, but I might consider, depending on matchups,
yeah,
I might consider not starting T.O. against a team like Baltimore.
Right.
Because this is the finals. You've got to get the most points out of your team that you can possibly get. And if starting a guy like Tavares Jackson means getting the most points, and benching a guy like, I don't know, let's say Phillip Rivers.
Right.
You got to do it.
Sometimes you got to just make the sacrifice to get the points.
It's not about who you have an attachment to, who you like, who you drafted. It's about who gives you the best opportunity to win. And Tavares Jackson could, in certain circumstances, give you that best opportunity.
Sit or start, a guy who you love. You just absolutely love this guy. Terrell Owens of the Cowboys. Obviously a lot of hoopla and a lot of talk and a lot of controversy surrounding him the past couple of weeks in relation to his comments about Jason Witten and Tony Romo. So my question to you and to fantasy owners out there is, this week, you just mentioned his name, but let's talk about him. Do you start T.O. against the Baltimore Ravens?
I mean, obviously all of these are entirely contingent upon who else is on your team.
Yes.
I'd sit him. I really don't think he's going to produce against the Ravens. I think the entire Cowboy offense.
So you wouldn't even start Witten?
No.
Given everything?
No, I really wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would start him.
And how's your fantasy team?
Well, we're not in the playoffs anymore.
Right. So,
but that's not the point. That's not the point. I'm just that's not contingent on how. I mean,
it's like taking
I had a couple of key
it's like taking investment advice from somebody who's
No.
fired from
it's completely different than that. It's completely different than that. Listen, sometimes you have a string of bad luck.
Okay,
that's what
so
happens.
we're gonna chalk this up to bad luck.
It's bad luck. It happens all the time.
In case any of our viewers want to know what that head is doing in the shot. That's Michael Artis' big head.
He is back. He looks great tonight. He looks really good.
He looks very sharp.
Don't get the wrong idea, but yes, he does look good. And
no, excuse me. For our female audience, and for our gay male audience,
questioning,
gay or questioning, they could be bi-curious.
LGBTQ.
Yeah, Michael Artis is available.
Oh my God. Yeah, he is. Call us up, 347-482-2000. We'll leave it at that. And
we have a comment that says, that we need to start the playmakers. And is T.O. a playmaker? Yeah, he's a playmaker for sure.
Yes.
But given the fact that we're in the finals,
yes,
I just don't think that you can risk
too much of a risk.
You can't risk T.O. going, 3 catches for 42 yards or 4 catches for 37 yards or something like that, which is very, very possible against a Ravens defense when your quarterback is banged up, when your offense is struggling, when you don't have much of a running game. Yes, I know Tashard Choice, had something like 19 rushes for 93 yards, but he broke off a 38-yard touchdown run, which accounted for, 40% of his rushing total.
Yes.
So, I would just be very, very concerned about T.O. being my number 1 receiver going into the finals.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm going to start him because I'm a big believer in momentum. I'm a big believer in momentum, basically, and in that the Cowboys at this point, they have seen the Giants lose a couple of games.
Yeah, this is true.
And I think that the Cowboys they just beat the Giants rather convincingly.
But we're talking about an individual player, right?
We are talking about, but
T.O. has no momentum.
T.O. But he does have momentum in the
Look
sense
at it. Here's T.O.'s momentum.
Go ahead.
I'm going to say no. See, now most teams aren't that deep. Most teams have alternatives, and there are guys in the league.
At this point of the season, you need those alternatives.
There are alternatives. Now look, I'm going to show you what T.O.'s momentum is. No, we have it. We have it drawn out. You can see very clearly what T.O.'s momentum is. Okay. Now T.O.'s momentum. Can you see this?
Not really.
I lost my
lower it a little bit.
I lost my my thing here. Hold on, I'll get it back. I need to show you T.O.'s momentum. It doesn't matter. T.O.'s momentum, I think that we can see. Yeah, there we go. He had 17.5 points 2 weeks ago, 11 points 3 weeks ago, 17.5. Last week, or 2 weeks before that, week 14, 11 points. Week 15, 5.5 points. That sounds like negative momentum. That sounds like not what we're looking for a number 1 receiver going into the finals.
Yes.
And again, this is my personal opinion.
Yes.
But I'm looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the trends. I'm looking at the fact that they're going up against what's probably the number 2 defense in the NFL.
Yes.
And I say, I understand that he's your number 1 receiver, but I would rather go again with a guy like Justin Gage.
I knew you were going to say
and that's crazy. I know. I understand. Justin Gage instead of T.O.
Yeah.
But I would rather go with a guy who has a much better chance of putting up numbers, I would start Steve Breston over T.O.
Really? I would start T.O. I think that you want the guy to get the ball into the end zone. I think T.O. is still your guy. Somebody wrote, it's just 2 points, Dan, which is true.
Good.
In most fantasy leagues,
and when you lose by one, then,
Right. It is just 2 points.
It's very true. Anyway.
But anyway, we'll move forward. Sit or start. This one is going to be, I think this is one of the games of the year, and I think it's going to be a joy to watch. I personally think the Pittsburgh defense, and I think Pittsburgh in general has been playing some of the best football in the league. And I think that in terms of fantasy, Pittsburgh's defense has put up major numbers this year. But they're up against a test. The Titans have a lot of weapons. They're a good running team. I would say that they're a very good running team mostly. And they're very good on the defensive end and the special teams. But do you start the Pittsburgh defense against the Tennessee Titans?
Absolutely. Start with confidence.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely a start. Tennessee had a horrible offensive game yesterday. Pittsburgh has just been on fire. Tennessee doesn't necessarily have a ton to play for. They've sewn up their playoff spot. They're looking okay. I would absolutely start the Pittsburgh D.
Me too.
They're getting takeaways, which give you points. So even if Tennessee puts up some points, you'll still get points back via the turnovers. I absolutely like the Pittsburgh D.
Start or sit. Aaron Rodgers, decent week. He's actually, in terms of individual output, he's done very well for many fantasy teams. He puts up touchdowns. He puts up points. It doesn't show in terms of how Green Bay has played this year, but Aaron Rodgers is one of the top 5 fantasy quarterbacks.
This is fantasy.
And do you start him, though, at Soldier Field against Chicago, big NFC
Start
North
him. He's still got a lot to prove.
Yeah.
The Green Bay record isn't that great, and I think that he's still got to prove to Packer fans that despite their bad record, that they still have fight in that team, that he's still a top-flight quarterbback.
Yeah.
And I think he goes out and actually has a really nice game against Chicago. I start him.
I would start him as well. We're in agreement just about on all this. But this one is going to be interesting because a lot of teams, 79%, actually, in 99% of leagues polled in Yahoo Sports, somebody owns Eli Manning. So obviously Eli is a staple on somebody's team.
Yep.
But he had a bad week, horrible week against Dallas. In part of that wasn't necessarily his fault, but he was sacked 8 times. He had a hard time getting into his rhythm. And the Giants haven't been playing that well the last couple of weeks. They're in a little bit of a downturn. With that said, they now play one of the better teams in the NFC, the Carolina Panthers, also at 11-3. Do you start Eli, knowing everything that's going on with the Giants, knowing that they're playing a hot Carolina team? Start Eli Manning or sit him against Carolina?
Sit. Sit Eli Manning.
Is he a dog? Like, come on. Just sit him.
I say we sit Eli Manning.
You think
I've never been a big Eli Manning fan.
In terms of fantasy or in terms of fantasy?
No, both. Right. As a quarterback on a football team and, as a fantasy quarterback.
You like that. You like that single shot, don't you?
It changes, changes
How come
up
I don't
the
get a
pace a
single
little bit.
shot?
When you get to be, when you get to wear the number 2 headset, you can have a one
As
shot.
opposed to the number. Or maybe if I grow out the beard, maybe.
Or maybe when you grow out the beard.
So sit Eli.
I'm not a fan of the ground balls and the air-mailed passes and all that stuff. I understand.
Somebody says start.
18046. You say start. I have no idea how your fantasy football team is doing. I would imagine it's doing poorly. So
unless they're a Giant fan, maybe they're saying that.
Yeah, you know what? But fantasy football is not about. That's the problem.
Yes.
That so many people have with fantasy sports.
It's tough to separate.
They're huge fans of a particular team. They want to have those guys on their fantasy team, but fantasy football, fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball, fantasy sports just doesn't work that way. Right. And you wind up getting frustrated with your team because your fantasy team's not doing as well. It's not about that. It's about having the best guy in position for your so that your team can win. And that's what we were talking about with Tavares Jackson. And with Eli Manning, I just don't think that he's, Carolina's been on fire.
They haven't.
I'd stay away from.
I like Eli Manning, but I think you stay away from him against Carolina, and especially the way the Giants have been playing, and with everything going on behind the scenes, and with not having a number 1 receiver. Really, when you think about it, that's really I think what's hurt them in fantasy, especially. So I would sit him as well. David Clowney had a big catch yesterday in the Jets' win over Buffalo, a dramatic win for the Jets. And this one's I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know. I'd like to hear from David Clowney, and I'd like to know, what the game plan is for next week, if he may get a couple of touches. But assuming that he will be inserted into the offense somehow. They're playing the Seahawks.
Hold on a second. I just want to apologize to everybody for all that background noise that was in there for the last 10 minutes.
Yes.
That was my fault.
The phone line on, but we have shut it down now.
So it probably sounds a lot better now.
Yes. You dropped the ball, picked it right back up.
Exactly.
That's what we do here on Press Pass TV.
Now we're going to pick up the David Clowney ball.
Yeah. So now David, assuming that he gets some touches. Again, a lot of it is an assumption. But assuming he gets some touches, assuming he gets to play against a team like the Seahawks who, they're the Seahawks. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Do you start him?
No. David Clowney, a great guy. He had his, he had his first catch yesterday. The announcers talked for a little bit about some of David's off-field work. They talked about how David has sole custody and is raising his 10-year-old son, and helps him with his homework all the time. And often, David doesn't get here until later in the evening because he's helping. Did I say son? I meant brother. Because he's helping his brother with his homework and helping him with projects and all kinds of stuff like that. He's a tremendous guy. He's very funny. He's very entertaining. He's not a start at all. I mean, at all. Maybe next year. And I wish that coming out of the preseason that he didn't get hurt because he had that amazing first preseason game. He did. And he really looked like he was going to be a standout wide receiver for the Jets this season. But, it didn't happen, and I would stay away from him.
Let's take a quick break. We are here on Press Pass TV, PressPassRadio.com. We're streaming to you live thanks to Ustream.tv. We're going to take a quick break. We got a lot more to talk about. We have Monday Night Tailgate also on deck immediately following our show. I know Michael Artsis has some great guests lined up, which we'll talk about a little bit after the break. So stay tuned. We have much more to come here on Monday Night Fantasy right here on PressPassRadio.com.
You're watching Press Pass TV. We'll be back right after these messages from our sponsors.
This segment is brought to you in part by the Hotel Ivy, part of Starwood Hotels and Resorts Luxury Collection. At the Hotel Ivy, you set the bar. It's their pleasure to raise it. To find out more about Hotel Ivy, including rates, accommodations, or their state-of-the-art spa and gym, log on to their website, thehotelivy.com. And for a tour of this great place to stay, search Hotel Ivy on our website, presspass.tv.
Fun can hit anytime once you've been to Dave & Buster's. Now there's more to come back for. With the Eat and Play combo, choose from 11 great entrees, get a $10 game card, only $15.99. Or double your games for $8 more. Fun like this.
22. Number 22.
Stays with you.
Okay.
We got to thank Joseph's Custom Clothing. Joseph's makes the best custom clothing around. You got to check them out. Now, they make the clothing for Justin Tuck and Michael Strahan and about 300 or 400 guys around the league as well. Coaches, players, and also CEOs of businesses. They make great stuff, and they give every one of our guests a free complimentary custom-made dress shirt just for them, which is amazing. Check them out, 631-683-4091 for the best custom clothing around. You can't go wrong, and you'll love it. That number again, 631-683-4091. Ask for Marissa or Joey.
If you need business cards, signs, and graphic designs for your business, visit our good friend Leon at Sir Speedy. Located at 14 Penn Plaza in New York City, Leon will help make your business look great in no time. If you just have a question, shoot him an email at sirspeedynyc@earthlink.net for help. Spread the word with Sir Speedy graphic designs and signs.
You're watching Press Pass TV. And now, back to the action.
Welcome back to Monday Night Fantasy here at The Hill on 29th and 30th Street, 3rd Avenue in New York City. Jack Cognetta, Dan Cohen. This is Monday Night Fantasy, 347-482-2000. Give us a call. We are talking fantasy football, and we've been talking about a lot. We went over the bet. We went over our sitter start. We had Matt call in. But we want to hear what you think. Give us a call, 347-482-2000. 2000, and this is a time when we're gonna hear from Jesse Meehan, our fantasy football correspondent. So Jesse, if you're out there, give us a call, and we will throw you in to talk a little bit about injuries and some last minute moves teams can make for their championship rounds coming up next week in fantasy football. So we'll wait to hear from Jesse, and then we're gonna kind of do a little bit of a recap. We're gonna talk a little bit about some of the fantasy busts from this year, some of the surprises. And then we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about, really what we've learned from this fantasy football season in terms of, who is a top 10 player and who isn't anymore, and who maybe next year when you're drafting, you may second guess picking him in the first or second or third round and maybe want to go for somebody who maybe has emerged, like an Andre Johnson or like you name it, you know what I mean? Like
Roddy White,
exactly, or like a Michael Turner for the Falcons. Maybe these are guys you consider.
Let's get it moving.
Yes. So I am waiting to hear from Jesse, but if we don't hear from Jesse, Jesse,
we're waiting for Jesse. I wasn't
we are,
listening to you.
But I know you weren't. You never listen to me anyway. Anyway, but if you're listening, call us up. We'll put you on. But for now, why don't we get started with the discussion? And let's start with some of these fantasy football busts. And number one on the top of the list has to be, in terms of running backs, LT, LaDainian Tomlinson. A very disappointing season. Just 8 touchdowns. Hasn't even rushed has just rushed, I believe now, has surpassed the 1,000-yard mark. And a very
horribly
disappointing
disappointing.
season.
Yeah, I mean, everybody who drafted LaDainian Tomlinson, everybody who drafted Tom Brady. I think that, to be honest with you, I think that people who drafted LaDainian Tomlinson are worse off than people who drafted Tom Brady. Right. And I'll tell you why. Because people who drafted Tom Brady had the opportunity to pick up, another quarterback who was probably pretty decent. Quarterbacks often surprise you over the course of a season. You never quite know who's going to be a top quarterback or a top 10 quarterback or something like that. Guys who you think at the beginning of the season will be really good turn out to be just all right, and so on. But in terms of running backs, for the most part, you pretty much know what you're going to get. And if Tomlinson doesn't produce like this season, where are you going to go to find another running back? You're really not going to find another one. And that kills you. So I think that LaDainian Tomlinson is, far and away the number one bust this fantasy season. He's just been very, very disappointing.
We do have Jesse Meehan of Minnesota on the line with us. Hey, Jesse, what do you think about that? Do you think for fantasy owners, do you draft LT next year given what you've seen this year?
I think it all depends on where he falls to it. He's still a top 5 pick. Just because his name alone, he's a scary top 5, top 10 pick. Maybe if you're at 4, 5, 6, depending on who's out there, he's not a bad guy to scoop up, but he's definitely not the number one overall pick consensus like he was this year. I go to AP, guys like Westbrook if they're healthy, but the way this year's gone, it's going to be really interesting to see how the top 5, top 10 shake out next year with all the injuries, with guys like Joseph Adai, who's also a bust. So it kind of depends. You might see more quarterbacks and receivers up there instead of guys like LaDainian Tomlinson.
I think that you will see more quarterbacks up there. My strategy used to be to take a wide receiver with my first pick if I was outside of the top 5. This was 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago. I was taking guys like T.O. I even considered taking a guy like Torrey Holt or Marvin Harrison. This is now 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Not anymore for those guys, but I think that the running back class is sort of evened out a little bit. That you don't have any more Priest Holmes, Sean Alexander, LaDainian Tomlinson putting up just ridiculous numbers. And, I think we'll start to see some really, interesting things going on in terms of drafting. But yeah, man, LaDainian, huge bust. Huge. And this is, speaking as a LaDainian Tomlinson owner.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly was a disappointing season for him and for fantasy owners that had him. Jesse, we'll keep you on for this discussion if you don't mind. I kind of like having the three-way. Don't even go there. Anyway.
I'm ignoring it.
Good. I'm glad you're ignoring it.
I can't even deal with that comment.
Please. Just don't deal with it. Anyway, let's move on. Another bust that I think is a bust. We could talk about it. I think Ocho Cinco was a bust this year. I think that he never really got into a rhythm. I think that, not having a steady quarterback certainly hurt that. But what do you think, Ocho Cinco?
To be honest with you, the only thing disappointing about Ocho Cinco to me was the fact that we didn't get to see more antics and theatrics and all that stuff.
Celebrations,
That was the only thing that I was disappointed about with his 2008 season. I did not expect him to be at all productive, actually. When he went down in the preseason with a torn labrum, with that shoulder injury, there was no chance. My feeling, there was no chance that he was going to be productive in 2008. A torn labrum is a horrible injury in terms of, it's not debilitating in the grand scheme of things, but if you're an athlete, and especially a professional athlete who needs to perform at the highest level possible, and for a guy who was really an elite player in the league at his position, a torn labrum is just a disastrous injury. You can't lift your arm, you can't stretch, you have no range of motion, and for that to be an injury that a wide receiver faces, I just thought it was going to be impossible for him to really produce. So, I don't know about everybody else, but my expectation for Chad Johnson was for him to have a pretty shitty season, and that's what he had. I happened to really enjoy his antics, and so I was disappointed that we didn't have more of that this season. I think that's one of the things that makes sports fun. At least professional sports. It's all about watching guys do things that you can't do, and being awed by what they can do, and be entertained by what they can do, and shaking pom poms with the cheerleaders afterwards, or like a TO stunt, like pulling a Sharpie out of your sock. I know there are purists who say get rid of that crap, but I like it.
I like it too. I do.
So
I'm in awe of you, Dan. By the way.
I know. I've been to your bedroom where you have my pictures up. I know.
At least we know that Ocho Cinco isn't suffering from a leaky vagina.
Yeah, he had a legitimate injury. Tony Romo,
Jesse, what do you think about Ocho Cinco? You think it was a bust this year? A lot of expectations with him.
I couldn't agree more with Dan, actually. He was a guy I kind of stayed away from, not only because of torn labrum injury, but really they lacked a running game in Cincinnati, and you could kind of tell last year that it was kind of a change in the guard. Hushmanzada looked like the number one guy there, and he was going to get more looks than Chad Johnson. But again, he was just a guy I stayed away from, so I'd call him a bust, but you could kind of see it coming from a mile away. And next year, maybe if he's 100% healthy, Carson Palmer comes back, and they get any semblance of a running game there, he could be a decent pickup in the later rounds. But this year, I just kind of stayed away from him. And when people offer him in trades near the end of the year, I never even looked at him as a buy low candidate. He's getting 4 or 5 looks a game, and especially once Fitzpatrick came in. That was kind of the end of the season there. And I told people they might as well drop him because he's really not going to have any more value this year.
Well said, Jesse.
You love that. You love that one-shot cutaway. You just love it.
It's the best way to go.
It's all about Dan.
That's right.
Fantasy football busts. Here are two guys, and this is maybe how we could begin to start this discussion about who really is a top player at their position and who really is now beginning to reach past their peak. And two guys that I think really come to mind, Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison. Their production down from their peak of their career. Good seasons, decent seasons, but not the Reggie Wayne or Marvin Harrison seasons we're used to. Were they busts this year? And are these two guys that you want to consider in, your top 10, 15, 20 picks, of a draft next year?
Well, I don't think I wouldn't call Reggie Wayne a bust this year. I mean, he's got 74 catches for 1,022 yards and 5 touchdowns.
Okay. The touchdowns maybe on the low end of what he's used to producing.
Yeah, I mean, his last, including this year, his last 5 years, were 77 for 1,210 and 12 touchdowns for 1,210 yards and 12 touchdowns. 83 catches for 1,055 yards and 5 touchdowns. 86 catches for 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. 104 catches last year for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. So this year he's down to 74 for just over 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns, which is, more in line. He's got 2 games left, so we figure he'll be somewhere around 80, 83, 84 catches, and, let's say he gets 80 or so yards in the next 2 games average, so another 160 yards, so it'll be like, almost to 1,200 yards and maybe 6 touchdowns. 80 catches, almost 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns. That puts him at the low end of his average for the last few years. So I wouldn't consider him a bust.
Right.
Marvin Harrison, I don't think you can consider a bust only because, were you really expecting that much out of him? I really wasn't. I would, in thinking about this question, whether or not these guys were busts or not, I went back and looked at some old numbers. And I decided to compare Marvin Harrison's best seasons with Jerry Rice's best seasons, and even T.O. Because, is T.O. a bust? We can, consider whether or not T.O. is a bust this year. I mean, he certainly hasn't had the best numbers of his career, and his numbers are definitely down from last year. And, we think about Jerry Rice as being, really just the best football player ever. And looking at Jerry Rice's numbers over their most productive, over his most productive 10 seasons, or over Marvin Harrison's most productive 7 seasons, Jerry Rice averaged 93 catches, 1,400 yards, and 14 touchdowns. Marvin Harrison, 105 catches, 1,424 yards, and 12.8 touchdowns.
Wow, better than Rice.
More catches, more than 10 catches per season better, virtually the same amount of yardage, and just 1 touchdown per season worse. Now, I mean, I don't know if we necessarily think about Marvin Harrison that way, but that's pretty incredible.
Jesse, are you back on the line, by the way? Jesse?
Well, maybe we have somebody else on the line.
Well, we did have somebody else call in. I think that may have messed up our connection. Jesse, you there? All right, we'll hang up on. We've lost Jesse.
It's okay.
We'll try to figure out the phone lines.
Anyway, getting back to this question of Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison.
Yeah.
I don't think that Reggie Wayne was a bust this year. I don't think that Marvin Harrison was either, just because I don't think that anybody had expectations for Marvin Harrison that he would be some kind of really great player this year. I just don't think that people had that expectation. But for purposes of comparison, these guys, Marvin Harrison. And, I didn't even mention T.O. I mean, T.O.'s averages over his best 9 seasons. So this was Jerry Rice's 10 years, T.O.'s 9, and Marvin Harrison's 8.
Okay.
T.O. averaged 89 catches, just over 1,300 yards, and just over 13 touchdowns a year.
Wow.
For those 9 years. Now,
right.
Jerry Rice did it for 10, T.O. for 9. Now, what makes Jerry Rice a standout is what he did afterwards.
Right.
The 6 years following. 6 years following that huge amount of production, which is what the phase of Marvin Harrison's career that he's entering.
Right.
He averaged 77 catches, 1,000 yards, and 6.5 touchdowns per year.
Right.
Which is what everybody would consider. I mean, look at Roddy White.
In his mid-30s, 40s.
Roddy White this year, 1,300 yards and 6 touchdowns. For Jerry Rice, that would have been a slightly better than average year for the downturn, the downturn of his career, which just puts into perspective how great Jerry Rice was, and also really what Marvin Harrison was able to do as a football player and certainly as a fantasy. I think we've got another call.
Yeah,
as a fantasy producer.
Well, we're having trouble connecting him. Yeah, that's a good point. You really did your research.
I did some research.
Some research. You got more numbers on there than the stock exchange on that sheet of paper. Yeah, I'm putting them in. Hey, Jesse, are you back with us? We were trying to get Jesse back on. Jesse? Yeah, we have a problem now with the connection. It's all your fault.
Let me see if I can fix that. But we can move on to...
Yes, but that's a good point, and it's an interesting point, especially about how dominant how dominant Marvin Harrison has been, and how it's not just over a span of 2 seasons, but how... And I think the other point is, while it may seem like a downturn in production, it's still, compared to everybody else, really, really good. And in terms of fantasy, he's still very, very productive.
Yeah, and I would consider Reggie Wayne for next year. I mean, he had a quarterback that was injured.
Yeah.
There were some real problems in Indianapolis this year. The running backs were injured. So, I think that Reggie Wayne actually had a fine season. Not stellar, but I certainly wouldn't consider him a bust.
A productive season in terms of fantasy, certainly. We'll move on and try to steamroll through a couple of these. What we're doing is we're kind of recapping what has happened this year and maybe giving people some advice on what to think about next year when drafting some of these players. Because I feel like it really is the make or break, is the draft. You need that core group of players that make up your team. You could do a lot on the free agent wire and on the waiver wire and even make a couple of trades, but really you are who you draft. And I think that I think that's important. You know, if people drafted Tom Brady and LT this year, they obviously had a bad string of luck, and it's tough to come back from that.
I don't think anybody drafted both T.O. and Tom Brady.
Well, maybe. Not T.O., LT.
I mean, LT and Tom Brady.
Why not? That's not. Well, if it would be tough because those
but
guys
anyhow, if you drafted either of them.
Either of them, you had a pretty bad string of luck, you know. So it's important, I think, to reflect on that and to give people some advice on that as well. Jesse having some trouble there with the connection. We're going to try to get that to work for you, Jesse, as soon as we can. So here we go. We talked about some busts. Let's talk about some surprises. Surprise or maybe not a surprise. And we're going to list a couple of players who you may have drafted, you may have picked up on the free agent list. You may have thought of not picking up at all. And one of those guys that really just emerged on the scene, Kurt Warner, of Arizona, got the start, in place of Matt Leinart, and really got the job done for the Cardinals this year. A top 7, top 8 fantasy quarterback. Really a top 5 when you think about it.
Absolutely, top 5.
Are you surprised, though, by the production that he was able to put up at an age where, he's also peaking as a quarterback, but yet he really got the job done?
Yeah, I mean, I have actually happened to draft Kurt Warner also, and I think that, I thought that there was a chance that he could have a good season, but
yeah.
I definitely didn't expect number 2. I drafted Peyton Manning and Kurt Warner, and I didn't expect to have, a real conflict each week about who I should start. I really, I didn't think that he was going to do that well. I thought he might be insurance. I thought that he'd be, a spot starter.
Week,
that
right.
Maybe he was he could be trade bait. I did not expect him to be the number 2 fantasy quarterback in the league. Definitely a surprise.
Yeah. Aaron Rodgers, another guy, we talked about him earlier in the show. Very productive year in terms of fantasy, which tends to get overshadowed by the way Green Bay played this year. But Aaron Rodgers, another guy, top 5 fantasy quarterback. Are you surprised, considering this is his first full year, active as a quarterback? A lot of pressure, has big shoes to fill in Green Bay, but gets the job done in terms of fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Aaron Rodgers was definitely a surprise performer this year. And, I think a lot of people just didn't really know what to expect out of him. And they found out. And they found out that he's, a guy to look at outside of, really when Tom Brady comes back, Drew Brees, and, maybe Jay Cutler, that, he's right up there in the top, in the bottom 5, maybe, 5 to 7 in the league in terms of quarterbacks. I mean, maybe even, maybe really right around 5 or 6.
I think we have Jesse back on. Jesse, can you hear us if you're there?
Yeah, I can hear you guys now.
All right, we rebooted, and I think we have Jesse back on. We're sorry about that, man. We lost you due to some technical difficulties. But Jesse Meehan from Minnesota, our fantasy football correspondent, back on.
And I just want to point out,
yes.
Jesse, you should know this, and so should everybody else, that our producer, Michael Artsis, came up big time.
There he
Michael
is.
Artsis, thank you very much.
He looks like $1 million.
He doesn't like to go on camera until his show starts.
He's very camera shy.
But he made it happen.
He's on fire. Totally on fire. More from him. Oh, here we go. You see, he did this last week too.
He turns around like he doesn't want to be on, and he doesn't want to say anything.
All I want to say, all I want to do is steal your viewers.
Well, of course.
All I want to do is say that
we were just talking about you before. Actually.
We've got a great show. David Zayas from Dexter is here, and David Clowney just walked in from the New York Jets' first NFL catch.
Yes, excellent catch. He's looking real sharp tonight.
In. So I'm going to go with that, but
okay.
I just wanted to let you guys know that.
Thanks for getting the calls working.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem, guys.
We appreciate it. And do stay tuned for Monday Night Tailgate coming up next.
All right, cool.
All right, Michael Artsis, his 30 seconds of airtime on our show. It's about all we give him. We're very stingy. Never again. That's it. Chop, chop. Anyway, Artsis and Monday Night Tailgate. Tons of guests coming up next. But let's get back to what we were talking about.
So Jay Cutler, Aaron Rodgers, we just finished talking about. Now we're into Jay Cutler.
Jay Cutler, a guy who personally I was skeptical about at the beginning of the season.
As was I.
And he really just turned. I mean, granted, you are sometimes who your weapons are, but you got to get the ball to them. And Brandon Marshall has had a terrific year. Eddie Royal has put up some big numbers, and I think that you take a look at what Jay Cutler was able to do this year. Another guy, I was a little bit surprised at the amount of production that I think he put up.
Yeah, Jay Cutler surprised me also. I didn't necessarily think that he was going to do as well as he did. Having nothing to do with his diabetes. I actually didn't really think that was that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But everybody likes to pick an issue and run with it at the beginning of the season to talk about something. But I didn't think that he was going to have the kind of year that he did.
Yeah.
And he was definitely surprising, and I think positively surprising for lots of people. He's certainly proved that he's, maybe top 5 quarterback in the NFL in terms of fantasy production. Maybe he's with Aaron Rodgers in that 5 to 8 range, but definitely a positive surprise.
We'll move from quarterbacks to running backs, and this guy, really the top fantasy running back that is this year, and that is Michael Turner, a guy who the first week of the season really emerged on the scene with 3 touchdowns, and I know I sat here with Abe Elam and I said, wow, Michael Turner, who would have thought? And Michael Turner has proved to be a top fantasy running back. Is this a guy, well, are you surprised that he was so good is my first question. And my second question is this a guy next year, draft time, you think about drafting him, or are you still a little bit skeptical about his production, as far as being consistent next year?
I was very surprised by Michael Turner. I was not, at the beginning of the season, I was not among the believers.
Yeah.
I really didn't think that he was going to have that great a year. I wasn't sold on Matt Ryan. I definitely wasn't sold on the rest of that offense. I know they brought in Ovi Mihaly as at fullback, and Ovi gets no credit, but in reality, Ovi Mihaly is the highest paid fullback in the NFL, and there's a reason for it. He's really effing good.
Yeah.
And I think that Michael Turner's production sort of speaks to how good not just Ovi Mihaly is, but how good the rest of that team is, how well Matt Ryan played, how well that offensive line played. The wide receivers, obviously Roddy White did a great job, but Michael Jenkins did a great job this year too.
So he's a guy you would consider drafting next year as a running back.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you've got to consider Michael Turner at this point.
I agree with Dan. I think the main thing you touched on is the passing game. In football, you need 2 ways to attack. And if you have no passing game, they'll put 8 guys in the box. And if you have no rushing game, they're going to put 8 guys back into the passing game. So once Matt Ryan really established himself, especially with that first, 64-yard touchdown pass to Roddy White, the first pass of his career. But after a few games, when everyone realized that passing offense was for real and that Matt Ryan was really stepping up his game, they started respecting that, and they couldn't put 8 guys in the box against Michael Turner, and then he made him pay every time he didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that, Michael Turner catapulted himself into, one of the top couple spots in drafts next year. Absolutely. I mean, it's him, Westbrook, Adrian Peterson.
Thomas Jones.
And Thomas Jones. I mean, those are your top 4 fantasy running backs this year.
Yeah. And that's a guy, I guess we could kind of skip him, but not really. Thomas Jones, another big year for the Jets.
Thomas Jones had this was his career best year.
Yeah.
By far. I mean, there's no question. He had 3 years ago, he ran for 1335 and 9 touchdowns, but he killed that this year. Not just because of running the ball, and by the time the next 2 games are over, he'll have, I would imagine, have eclipsed the 1335. He certainly demolished that in terms of touchdowns, but by the time the season is over, he'll have caught more balls than he'd ever caught in his career. He'll have the most total touchdowns that he ever had in his career. And that speaks to, I think, obviously the Jets' passing game, but that revamped offensive line. They brought in a brand new fullback, one of the best fullbacks in the game, and he ran wild. And I really wasn't that into Thomas Jones at the beginning of the season, and lots of people thought that he might have a real good year. But I still think that he surprised a lot of people. I mean, he could rush, he could have close to 1,500 yards by the time, 1,400 yards by the time this.
Maybe 1,500 if he has 2 big weeks.
Yeah, 2 huge weeks, but 1,400 yards, isn't out of the question.
No.
And for Thomas Jones, that's just phenomenal. So, hats off to Thomas Jones and to everybody who drafted him. I don't know, Jess, what do you think about Thomas Jones this year?
I'm a huge Thomas Jones guy. I actually got him in all my leagues, and I've always believed in him. He's always got a lot of yards with Chicago. He really stepped up his game, and then they got Anthony Thomas and decided to go with Thomas instead of him. And then even last year, he only had 2 touchdowns total with the Jets, but he ran for a lot of yards, and he's just never been a goal line guy. And I think this year he really stepped up his game around the goal line. He's getting those inside the 5, inside the 10-yard carries. And another thing is Leon Washington spelling him.
Yep.
The kind of combination they have, he doesn't have to run as hard as much. They get Leon Washington on those pass plays. They put sets in with both of them in the game, and it's really affected his attitude towards the game, I think. And with Leon Washington coming in there and stalling him every once in a while, he had a little more energy, and it really showed. And he lifted my fantasy team, all my fantasy teams. But he's a guy I definitely think is a top 5, top 10 pick next year, and he's not going to disappoint.
Yeah, I would agree. Brandon Jacobs, the other running back in New York.
Yes, good year.
Good year. Not, look, he's scoring touchdowns.
Yes, which is big.
He's running the ball for yardage. I mean, it's just his injuries that have been,
set him back a little bit. But that's a guy you consider because he's around the goal line. He's a smash mouth kind of runner. He puts up points, in terms of fantasy. Even when Tiki Barber was around, some people, believed you draft Jacobs as like a late pick because he would give you those short yardage situations. And now that he's in the feature back, 12 touchdowns already this year for the Jacobs.
I don't think that's necessarily surprising, but it was nice production. We can talk about a guy that I do think was, maybe surprised some people, but I don't really think was all that surprising. A guy like Santana Moss.
Okay.
Just jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
I honestly don't think that Santana Moss's production this season was all that surprising. I went back and looked at his numbers over the last, since his rookie season. His rookie season, he caught 2 balls for 40 yards. So outside of that, next year, he caught enough passes for 433 yards and 4 touchdowns. The next year, 1,105 yards and 10 touchdowns. But then back down to 838 and 5. Then he had his big Pro Bowl year when he had almost 1,500 yards and 9 touchdowns. But the year following that, 790 and 6 touchdowns. The year after that, last year, 808 and 3 touchdowns. So, at this point in the season, when Santana's got, he's got 6 touchdowns and I forget exactly how many yards. I just don't really consider that to be, that much of a surprise. I don't know if anybody really had, or if you did have high expectations for Moss, then you're kind of living off that one season in 2005.
Well, some people did. That's their for some people, that's their number 1 receiver.
Yeah, well, that's ludicrous.
In terms of fantasy numbers, though.
900. He's got 68 catches for 948 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, if you're going to make your number, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
No, the knock on him, I was going to say, is that he usually does it in bunches. He'll have 2 or 3 games where he'll have 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Usually on Monday Night Football, I remember a few years back, he had 200 yards and a couple touchdowns. This year he spread out a little more, but you just really can't put too much blame on him just because Jason Campbell really didn't mature as much, and they're really a run-first offense. So whoever really expected Santana Moss for that Pro Bowl year was sorely mistaken and kind of got, this is what I would guess here to have, maybe 1,000 yards and 6-7 touchdowns.
Yep, and just actually, Jesse, you were actually right about him doing things in bunches because this year, I know you said that he spread things out maybe a little more, but, on some level, he didn't really because in 3 games, week 8 against Detroit, week 4 against Dallas, and week 2 against the Saints. If we take those 3 games together, that's 450 yards, right, which is almost half of his entire production for the season in terms of yardage. He had 24 catches, which is about a third of his overall catches in those 3 games, and 3 touchdowns. So he had half of his touchdown production, almost half of his yardage, and what do we say? 30% of his catches in those 3 games. So really, what you said is true, that he does produce in bunches, and it's almost on some level feast or famine with Santana Moss, and a guy like that is definitely not a guy that you want to build around as your top wide receiver. And I think ultimately is just production that's been consistent with his production over the course of his career, and not really actually that surprising.
Jesse, final word is we're actually gonna wrap things up and pick up this discussion I think next week.
Yep.
But Jesse, anything else you want to say as we head out?
No, just congratulations to everyone who made the championship. Unfortunately, this year I did not, but good luck, and congratulations.
Yeah, and we will have our championship edition of Press Pass Radio's Monday Night Fantasy next week. And Jesse, as always, a pleasure. We'll see you next week. All right, so we'll continue this discussion next week.
Yep.
I think this is something important to talk about.
We've got some more running backs to talk about. We've got some more wide receivers to talk about.
And I'm sure there'll be other names that'll pop up as we see another week of football.
Yep,
so.
We'll talk about the defenses. We'll talk about what to look for coming up, I think, in next year, just off of this season. Now, obviously, in the offseason, we'll have all kinds of trades or free agent signings, and
injuries,
draft picks and injuries and all that kind of stuff that'll factor in. But there's some interesting things going on in fantasy football, and we will bring some of that to you next week.
Yes, we will. We will, and we want you to, and we will also update you on your bet with Matt, and we will update everybody on. We'll see how we'll ask people to call in and talk about their championship weeks, and so we will. It'll all happen next week right here on Press Pass Radio, Press Pass TV's Monday Night Fantasy. It's been a pleasure to have you all. I want to thank everybody for calling in and for listening. And you're Dan Cohen. I'm Jack Cognetta. We'll see you next week on Monday Night Fantasy. And stay tuned, though. Monday Night Tailgate is coming up next. Michael Arcis has got a ton of great guests, and we're looking forward to that. Right?
We're absolutely looking forward to it. I had already shut my mic off.
I know. You were done. You're
done.
You must smell that chocolate fondue. Because
it smells so good.
Doesn't it smell so good?
Between that, was it the fondue or was it the s'mores? Because the s'mores smell really awesome,
smells
too.
amazing.
You got to come down here and check some of this stuff out.
Definitely. The Hill's great to us.
3rd Avenue, New York City, between 29th and 30th Streets, Murray Hill. It's fantastic.
It's a great party.
It's a great place to hang out. They've got tons of TVs. Later on, actually, you know what I'm going to do right now? We never do this. We never really show what it looks like in here.
Yes, show.
I'm going to show what it looks like.
As much as our FireWire cable will allow us. But Dan Cohen is gonna give you a little bit of a view of sort of where we're at and where we hang out up here. This is the upstairs level of the Hill. We have some nice leather chairs, and people are hanging out, having dinner, having a couple of brews. And Dan Cohen just loves using the camera. I think that's the bottom line. That's right. We have the Dexter over here will be joining us in just a little bit with Michael Arcis. He's not Dexter, but he's from Dexter. That's right, David Zayas, and he'll be joining us in just a little bit on Monday Night Tailgate. And that's basically a look at sort of the setup we have here at the Hill. We got a bunch of flat screen TVs, people watching the Monday night game, hanging out. David Clowney of the Jets in the house. He'll be joining us just a little bit as well. I think that about covers my radio on-scene report for the last 2 minutes. So
yeah, isn't that how they trained you?
That is how they trained me.
Out in Syracuse.
That's what you do.
Horrible institution.
You just easy there. There might be some people listening, but that's basically what you do. You kind of just walk around and just talk about what you see. But anyway, we'll be back next week. Monday Night Fantasy. Stay tuned. Monday Night Tailgate is next. This is PressPassTV.com.
Thanks, guys.